On this episode of Through the Pines, we'll cover why and how to have the talk, the money talk with your partner before marriage. Welcome to a financial planning podcast with a down-to-earth vibe. Sasquatch listens while washing his air-cooled Porsche 911. This is Through the Pines. Our advisors for this episode, we welcome back Rex.m.Baxter and Brandyn Smith from planwithbaxter.com. They are 4 years straight from 23, 24, 25, and 26, the Forbes Best in-state wealth management team for Utah. And they're the advisor hub, fastest growing advisors to watch under $1 billion, as well as the receivers of the Ameriprise Client Experience Award, which, Rex, it means you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it means I've been around for a little bit.
You have a little bit of experience.
Yeah.
And we will dive into now, and you're both married. So
we are both nodding to each other.
Have you had the talk?
You had me nervous when you said the talk, right?
Yes,
I thought, oh my gosh, we're doing a financial podcast, right?
Yeah.
No, just want to make sure it's not some other kind of podcast.
Talk with your partner, with your spouse, which is a good question. Before we get there, Brandyn, you're a little younger, so maybe, and I don't know how far along you were in with your career, but is this a talk you had with your spouse before getting married about money?
Yes and no. I don't think I was perfect at it. We were both so young, you know, but yeah, I mean, there are definitely things, fortunately, like it all worked out, you know, there wasn't like mountains of credit card debt, you know, like, yeah. And so we were, but yeah, it would have been good to have this, and specifically to have in an ideal world, like, hey, let's both listen to this podcast and let's talk about it after, you know, let's talk about the topics, because I think having an outline of things to talk about is a good thing, just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Rex, do you have the talk?
No. Nope, no talking, no money talking before marriage for me.
Zero whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't think we had any. It was such a quick courtship and marriage.
Oh, yeah, 3 weeks.
Well, I don't know about 3 weeks, but it was fast. It was very, very fast, and I don't think we had any real money talks at all. You know, I don't think we talked about what we made. I don't think we talked about what debts we had. We didn't talk about spending. We didn't talk about any things we're going to talk about on here. And so it's going to be really interesting to see if a podcast like this, you know, we might want to track marriage rates going forward.
Yeah, great idea.
To see if this slows down the marriage rates or if it speeds it up.
Yeah, really though. But I think there is benefit to learning about something before you're committed. Right? Like to not being forced to accept maybe a negative attribute, but rather choosing to accept maybe a less than desirable attribute. I think that's the benefit of courtship, is not being committed, but learning about each other.
Yeah, I don't feel like this is first date material, but I do feel like it's...
Maybe. I don't know.
Might be second or third. We'll see.
Yeah, but I do feel like it should be early on, so that you can decide if you're at least on the same highway as each other,
right.
Or if you're completely going different directions.
Well, I'll give you
We've got a head-on collision coming at you.
Speaking of cars, I'll give you a personal example, and I apologize in advance because I did not ask permission from my wife for this story, but... This was the extent of our financial conversation, which is kind of funny. I was in her car at the time, and in the side door pocket was paperwork, and I was dating. We're dating. I was like, oh, what is this? I pulled it out, and it was title loan paperwork.
Oh no!
And when she came back in the car, I was like, what? Are you struggling? Like, what's going on? I asked her, I didn't know. And she was like, yeah, I didn't know what else to do. And she was a single mom trying to figure things out. And that's when I said, well, we don't do this. There's got to be other options. We don't do this. Let's figure this out. And she's like, okay. And then that was the whole extent of the pre-marriage financial conversation. But it was a pretty good experience to go through and be like, okay, well then let's get on the same page and figure it out, So... Yeah.
Interesting. So you, Brandyn, and I both married single moms.
Yes,
right.
That is true. Yes.
Which brings a different dynamic to this entire discussion. True. And so, and I didn't ask, Jenny's permission to share these stories either. So I better be a little bit careful. But when we met, she was living with her parents' house, and very shortly after we met, I moved into her house. And so she wasn't living in her house; she was living at parents, and I was living in her house. And even at that point, we didn't have a money talk. right? Not like, how much are you paying for the house? How much should I be paying you for the house? How much? I mean, we just didn't talk money, you know?
Oh, young love.
Yeah. I mean, and I got to say, we had the best first dating Christmas ever. For Sam, for our oldest daughter. I mean, I think we got a puppy. I think we had a roller coaster. We went up to the outlets up at Park City. I can't tell you how much big dog apparel we purchased, you know? So, I mean, all the things. And so, so would a money talk helped us? Probably.
So what do you think would have helped like introduce that topic, right? If you were to do it all over again, you go back to like maybe courtship time or early marriage, what would you have said in hindsight?
That's a great question, Brandon, because we're at the age where this information wasn't readily prevalent. So this podcast, like something where you could at least get the information would help.
Yeah, if I had a podcast I could have listened to and shared, that would have been ideal.
Be like, hey, let's go on a date to Costa Vida and talk about that.
Hey, I was listening to this podcast and they came up with these 10 questions that we should talk about, or some number, right? And so let's talk about it. So that's what we're doing today. We're helping you.
We're helping you. And this is, and this will also, don't say it like that. Like, I have 10 questions to ask you. But you're funny. Like, we're gonna talk about how to sort of deliver these, but you figure it out between the two of you as you're dating, because it's important information, and the topics include your money mindset and values, your current financial situation, whether or not to combine finances, protecting each other with insurance, short, mid, and long-term financial goals. What is your investing style, which you may not know? Because that's another thing, Brandon, when you said, well, you know, what would have helped this philosophy? Were we investing then? We probably had a 401k, but we weren't like investing necessarily. No, Rex might have been studying it. Past financial baggage, which you find that stuff out if you're marrying someone that has been married before. Estate planning and legacy, day-to-day financial management, and then prenups. So, let's dive in. Money mindset is the first thing. And so how does how each partner learns about money growing up, the relationships with spending, savings, and debt. And Rex, you've sort of talked about this as far as kids take on different or maybe the exact opposite of their parents.
Yeah, I think that the psychology of it is a lot of times our kids learn from us both the good and the bad, right? And so if they see how we're handling money and all of a sudden somebody might be extra restrictive on their dollars, then you find that the kids are typically very loose with their dollars, and vice versa. If the parents tend to be spendthrifts and have a ton of debt and things like that, then a lot of times you find the kids end up overreacting on the other end and end up being great savers and great investors and things like that. There's a lot of psychology that goes into that.
Yeah, Brandon?
I think with money mindset, in my opinion, from what I've seen, there's really two main camps with money mindset. On one hand, money is there to create memories. It's to go experience the world, right? Money is there as a tool to go and see and do things. And on the other mindset, money is security. Money is that safety net. Money is that backup plan so that one feels safe. And frankly, I think a blend of the two is the best and the healthiest, right? But typically people fall in those camps, also known as spenders or savers, right? And so really diving into that and understanding how do you view money? Because if there's not a right or a wrong answer, but I think making sure that you're on the same page and you've discussed this, like, hey, what do you want, right? Like, how much do you need in savings before you can feel like you can go out and spend? How much, those are the questions I think that should be asked.
Okay. Well, we have the actual questions that you wrote. You're so prepared for this, Brandon. I want to say thank you. This is a great job. What money lessons did you learn at home? That's good to know, because it's like, hey, how did you grow up? Like, what are you used to? What are you exposed to? And that's when we talk about, you don't want to be drilling your partner at the what'd you say, the restaurant, right, Brandon?
The first date.
Yeah, the first date. But that's something that can easily come up in conversation. It's like, speaking of money, like, how did you grow up? Like, what were you exposed to? Did you guys have big holidays or big gift giving sessions, or was it pared back or whatever? And you can kind of broach these questions a little easier. Do you feel more stressed about saving or about spending? How comfortable are you with taking on financial risks? But if you are dating someone who is open more or less to talking about money, maybe sometimes these questions will be easier to get into anyway.
I think a lot of times it's better when you're having those discussions to share first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
With an example, a lot of times kind of use an example and think it through. And so, if you're at a restaurant, an easy way to do that is you're kind of eating, saying, my parents, when they would go out to eat, they always kind of my dad would always kind of handle the bill this way. And if they went with another couple, my dad would always just cover the entire table, or my dad would just have, he would just speak up to the waitress and say, hey, can you just split the bill in two? And, I've got these two people, they've got those two people, or however your parents did it. And how did your parents do it? Mm-hmm. Right. And I think going through kind of an example and volunteering first, I think removes some of that barrier and defensiveness that can creep up really quickly when you're having money discussions that can be feel attacking at times, and you don't want to feel attacked, and you don't want your partner to feel attacked.
Yeah. Now on to, listen, those of you who have been married before, we're not leaving you out. So second marriage is the conversation's a little different. You can probably just straight up ask them. I mean, you just go right in for the kill on some of these sometimes, depending. So,
I think it depends on the baggage that they bring into that
100%.
second marriage.
Yeah.
Because I'm not even sure that sometimes, you may have been so upfront with your first marriage that going into second marriage, you're not willing to be as upfront. And so you don't want to go right in and ask, because it was such you almost have a PTSD.
There was like a controlling relationship.
Yeah. And so I'm not sure that everybody goes into that conversation.
Like emotional carryover.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good point.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Rex, that everyone's just going to be so different. Ultimately, what's funny is like, I'll talk to people all the time that'll be like, I've got a good chunk of money set aside that I want to do something with. And if I don't know that person, that good chunk of money has literally been anywhere between $2,000 and $1 million. Like, no joke, I've had that exact comment made to me. I've got a good chunk of money and it has been $2,000 or it has been $1 million. Like, literally, like, it's so relative. And so if you can get into details, sometimes that's better, right? Like, how much do you like to keep in emergency savings? Yeah. I don't know if you're, and it just depends on the relationship, but ultimately that would be a good thing to know.
And the correct answer is, well, when I was listening to the Through the Pines podcast, they said 3 to 6 months. And so that's the right answer.
So are you closer to 3 or closer to 6, right?
Right.
And bring that up and kind of narrow it in and see where they're at. And
they're like, $100.
I'm at 3 days. I'm at my 3-day savings limit right now.
I track it closely out of necessity.
I don't know. Let me see. Let me pull my app.
All right, number 2, current financial snapshot. And I've noticed with even just friends, some friends are more open talking about their current financial situation than other friends. And yes, typically when you're broke or don't have as much money, they might not be as open to talking about how broke, but they do say, yeah, I don't make a lot of money. I don't have very much. And I do have other friends who are very open. They'll say things like, I'm doing good, pretty good financially. I make good money at work. And like you said, Brandon, it can still be relative. But if they say that, that means that they're at least comfortable with it, right? And then I've even had friends tell me how much savings they have in the bank because how they see it for their age is almost a bragging right? Like it's like they feel good about it. And so it's like, I'm like, okay, I wasn't even asking, but that's nice. So every once in a while, they will just be comfortable sharing that type of information, but that gives you a financial snapshot of where you currently are.
Yeah. And that's another hard one too, right? Because the vague, like people are very relative. And what is doing good and maybe that's where the better questions come in is what is doing well, right? In an ideal world, where do you want to be? From an emergency fund to credit card debt to retirement savings, and I think as you talk, it usually can kind of become apparent, right? Like, oh, I'm very, very disciplined in my 401k savings, or I need to have so much in savings, or maybe that's something they haven't thought. I haven't looked at my 401k. And again, I don't know that this is like, end of the road. You get to the end of that, like, well, this isn't going to work out, but rather further exploring, figuring out, all right, like, would you be open to making sure we get this? Like, this is important to me. Or maybe it's not important to you, but then if it's not, you're probably not listening to this podcast.
Brandon, that's a really good point, because I just want to point out to all the listeners out there, we are not trying to break up relationships right now. We are just saying, like, these questions are good to talk about beforehand because they will make the marriage better. It just helps the relationship in the end. And then also, Rex, I want to know, did you ever ask for like previous year's tax returns before dating someone?
Just the past 3 years, the most recent 3 years.
Before going on a first date with somebody?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that we weren't within the audit range.
Right.
So if I could look at the previous 3 years, that'd be great.
I would totally lead with that on Tinder if I was ever on Tinder again. I'm like, well, I'm going to need to see your last year's tax return.
I can just see you at dinner now. You're only putting 9% into your 401k. I was really hoping for 10. Check, please.
Yeah. I'm out. Yeah. Oh. No, but you didn't cover these topics, did you, Rex?
No, we did not have these kinds of discussions.
Yeah.
But I think so. First marriages and second marriages are a little bit different on this one, right? Because what I see most times, and it doesn't make it right, but most times, initial marriages, everything is combined. They all share everything. Most times, it seems to me like on second marriages, things stay fairly separate. Just because, and I think it's for a variety of reasons. One, sometimes people have been burned. Other times people have lived longer independently, and so it just naturally kind of flows through to keep stuff independently. But I think that discussion of expenses and how are we going to split expenses, knowing that I have yet to see a perfect way for a household to split expenses. And the reason for that is it's almost impossible for two spouses to be making the exact same amount of money into perpetuity, right? One spouse is always going to make more than the other. And so how do you split that up, right? Does one spouse just end up with a lot more discretionary income and all the bills are split separately? Or do you keep discretionary income and fund spending about the same and one spouse covers more of the bills? I don't know. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer, but I think acknowledging that there is going to be some gray area is an important part of putting together finances.
Yeah, I think there's some wrong answers. I'm not sure that there's a perfect or a right answer, but
what's a wrong answer?
Answers. Just because I think that when you have that second marriage and you're starting to come together, right? Two people become one. And I think that there's a lot of inherent conflicts and animosity that can be brought up. And so if all of a sudden you come in and you say, okay, I'm making $100,000, you're making $50,000, so I'm going to cover, 2/3 of the bills, you cover 1/3 of the bill, and then all of a sudden they get, wage increases, and they don't want to contribute more to the budget, right? Or all of a sudden you lose your job and now you're making zero, and they're like, well, I'm only covering 1/3 because that's all I make, and you got to go get. I mean, there's just all these inherent kind of conflicts, and yet at the same time, if all of a sudden you say, okay, we're going to split it down the middle, both of us contribute, $3,000 into a pot, so we have $6,000. That's going to cover our mortgage, our food, our basic necessities. Then the person that has more discretionary income, feels a little freer to go on vacations and do those things. But then also the other one can start to begrudge them and say, you've got all this free money and you don't have to answer to me when you're buying stuff. And I feel like I don't have any of that discretionary money. And so I think there's a lot of those that bring up some hard feelings. And I think transparency is the one correct answer, is good communication and transparency. As soon as you start to hide things, as soon as you start to keep it completely separate from each other, I think that's a step in the wrong direction.
So when would you, if you're dating, when would you tell someone how much money you make or how much you have in savings?
I try and list that on Tinder just
up front.
I'm just joking.
Transparency is key.
I'm just kidding.
I love that so much. $17.50 an hour. Let's go. Who wants it?
Who wants a piece of this?
I mean, might as well. Like, let's just put it out in the open. Like, I know you love me for me.
But really,
I don't know that there's a magic time period. I think you've got to kind of feel that. I mean, the relationship shouldn't be built on, contrary to what people believe about me, it shouldn't be built on finances, right? It should be built on kind of the emotional and health and the ties in, and the relationship should be the foundation of that.
Which would suggest maybe waiting a little
And so
bit.
maybe waiting just a little bit, but there should be a natural feel at some point where you're like, okay, this is progressing.
Right.
And I'm wanting to take this to the next step, whatever that means, whether it's, I want to become exclusive, or I want
like
to become,
tomorrow's your wedding day.
Well, probably before that.
Okay.
Right? Probably before you get to that level.
Okay.
You want to have some discussions. probably before engagement, you want to have those discussions, to make sure that you're on those same pages. But before you take it to that level, you probably want to start having discussions about, how do we handle money? How do we view it? How much, how are we going to handle our savings? How would we handle these things? If we had a $10,000 emergency, we total a car and it's our fault and we have to come up with a deductible and replace the car and those kinds of things. How are we going to handle that? Are we taking out debt? Are we saving up for it in advance? Are we pulling out of a retirement account? What are we going to do?
Right.
And running through some different examples, I think is a good way to have those discussions.
Yeah. Rarely do we drive together. Just like, I got right hand, you got left hand. Right? Usually one person totals the car. Just kidding.
Well, that's why they totaled the car.
That's what.
They were both driving.
100%. So the next category would be insurance and safety nets, which this is, a little in the weeds here. And so I don't know about covering this first date either. But, when do you talk or how do you broach the category of life insurance? How much? Who's getting covered? Because then, it's like, well, I've got $2 million on me. So if you murder me, if I go missing, you get $2 million, or disability or health insurance, emergency fund scenario planning, like you said, Rex.
That's funny. I was just listening to a crime podcast.
You are? Yeah.
And the whole thing was over a $400,000 life insurance policy that the husband killed the wife on. Yeah. And so anyway.
Which also, it's like people now, I don't, this is bad, but like when there's theft, because I worked in retail for a long time, and people would steal things, I was like, dude, that's like less than, like, you're going to get busted and ruin your life for like $100 or what, like $200. I don't know.
Right. Is that really worth it?
I don't know. You're gonna murder somebody for $400,000.
I think our official recommendation is do not murder people.
Do not murder people
we can take
for
an
any
official
money
stance.
at all.
There is a right and wrong answer on that one.
I think on insurances, I think my preference is to certainly wait until after you're engaged, probably, to start having those kinds of discussions about, are we going to keep your health insurance or my health insurance, and talking about how much life insurance do we need as a couple when we first get married? How does that change when we buy a house? How does that change when we start to have kids? If it's a second marriage, do we already have kids? And does the life insurance go to the current spouse or to the
divorce decrees and what's required? Yeah.
Sorry, I was like spazzing out because I had a question that actually I thought would work. Should you marry for insurance?
No. So my official policy on that would be no. However, I have had clients that on occasions have done marriages of convenience for health insurance. Right. And generally it doesn't,
because they were already together. But they just weren't married.
Yeah, they were already together. They were, you could even argue that they were common law kind of marriages or things like that, or they had a really, really close long-term relationship, friendship. Both were single, and one had really good health insurance, and the other didn't have any. And so they're like, well, let's just make this official and things like that. But so I've seen it. I wouldn't say I haven't seen it, and people do it. Am I a fan of it? Probably not. But sometimes something like that can make sense.
Pension benefits. I've dealt with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next category would be your short, mid, and long-term goals. And my question would be to the financial planners here with us from planwithbaxter.com. What if I don't even know my own short, mid, and long-term goals? How do we talk about this with a potential spouse before getting married?
That is the most common thing, right? I know you just called on Brandyn. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
I'm jumping right in. But, I think a lot of people aren't asking those questions even of themselves. What do I want over the next 3, 6, 9 months? Because they're so busy in the grind of day-to-day living that they feel like they're never going to get there anyway. And so I'm just going through the grind. My goal is to, pay my debts and put food on the table.
Right.
For the next 6 months.
Right. Have enough to take you on date 2. Like
Yeah.
I do think these are conversations though that are much more natural earlier on. Right. And maybe if you were to like work into this would probably be one of the first, right? Like what are your goals? Do you have a home? Do we want to, what's your home purchase goal? What toys do you want? if any? Would you just travel?
I like that.
An important
more of like
thing?
dreams.
Not for that state too, though. Even I mean, maybe, but
I might be like first.
What's your home? What's your home goal on
Okay,
date
sure,
two?
maybe not home, not homes, but
My home goal is to move in with you in 6 months.
But what do you want to do? Wow. What do you want to do for fun, right? Like, what is it that you want? I
Rex,
don't know.
I want to date you. You'd be hilarious.
That's true.
Here's my tax returns.
Here's a copy of my will.
My insurance coverage. Yeah.
But the dreams flow into this, right? Like, what do you want out of life?
Right.
What like, and how are you planning to accomplish that financially? Like, those are really good.
I think those are good
important
early
things.
conversations,
Yeah.
right? But I think if you frame it that way, in your first or second day, what are your dreams for life? What
Right.
really are you trying to do? Where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, and then. Guys are not great at this, but remember what she said, fellas,
Yeah, write it
right?
down.
And then you can follow up on that in dates 4, 5, and 6, And so where girls are really good at remembering those details, and so if it's one of the gals out there, you can sit there and say, hey, I remember you were talking that this is one of your dreams. How do you save for that, right? Are you saving monthly for it, or what's your plans on how do we afford that financially? If that's really important to you, right? You really want, Sasquatch's 911 Porsche Carrera. How do we get to that?
Air cooled, yeah.
Air cooled, transmission, right? Is that what it was? Air cooled engine.
Yeah.
I want one.
Same. Very good. So now for second marriages, a financial question to ask about short, mid, long-term goals that doesn't sound like a financial question would be, would you like to have more kids? Because that is a financial obligation.
You can ask that?
Yep, 100%.
Wow.
Did you not ask that? Because you ended up with a lot more kids than you started with.
I think that's why I ended up with a lot more kids, because I didn't ask that.
Fair. Yeah. Do you have plans for kids? Maybe, have you been through college yet? Do you want to go back to college? Retirement timelines, decisions about keeping versus selling a current home that you may be living in or owning, or
Is there a place you want to be financially before you have kids?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Does your current home provide the space, right? If you're in a studio apartment and that's where you're living initially, that might not be ideal for a 2-year-old. Right. And so I think that does definitely dovetail into those conversations. Again, probably not first date material, but probably, early on in the relationship, you should be having conversations about, what's your, what do you think our family should look like, or how many kids do you want, or, those kinds of conversations I would think would come up, certainly before you're engaged and things like that. You should have those kinds of conversations.
We should probably redo this whole episode with just our spouses in here.
Yeah,
oh
we
my
should.
gosh, no.
Yes.
No.
Yes, come on. That would be awesome. We do need to do that. Maybe not even this topic, but we need to do that.
I'm going to wish you all
I've been
luck on
pushing
getting,
for that.
on getting my wife in here.
We're getting there.
I love it. All right. Okay. So that's, what about investing style and philosophy? Again, this kind of comes up in with like, do we even know this yet? It's before we're married.
I think it depends on how old they are and where they're at in their stage of life, right? And here we are living in Utah, and in Utah, people typically get married at pretty young ages. A lot of times you'll see people getting married at 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 kind of ages. And
That
a lot of
sounds so young.
I know,
Oh.
I know. and there's a lot of changes. I have a core belief that typically, there's so much change that happens during your 20s that typically you aren't really kind of set until you're 29 as far as maturity, emotionally, those kinds of things. And so even though you may have one outlook on your investments, and I think it's more of a question of, when you're dating, not necessarily a question of investing unless you're both investing. And that'd be a good question. Are you investing? Are you saving in a 401k or an IRA? Or are you familiar with a stock or a bond, or, those kinds of things? Or do you just believe it should stay in the tea kettle, right? Up in the closet like grandma did. And I think having that discussion is a good discussion, but I think it's more of a discussion of risk. How do you view risk, and how do I view risk financially? Do you feel like, buying a $200 car and dealing with the repairs and having to break down our freeway, is that risky? Or is having $10,000 of debt on a car, is that risky? Right.
Or what Sharpe ratios are you comfortable with? And
Probably not that direct. I'm not sure I'd go into Sharpe ratios and beta and alpha.
What the hell's a Sharpe ratio?
Yeah.
What's your PE comfort zone? When do you start to get nervous?
Okay, yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
How correlated is this? Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not sure I'd get that. So I think on investing, it's interesting to ask that question, because I think it depends on, if you're talking to a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old and it's a second marriage, it'd be, for most people pretty abnormal not to have some investing experience, whether it's in their 401k or whether it's in a retirement plan of some sort, or their spouse had one. And so now through the divorce, they ended up with, through a quadro, part of the retirement account. And so I think on a second or a third or a plural marriage kind of I'm just kidding.
A whole other category. It's a different show, Rex.
So I think that's a different conversation than a first marriage that's in your early 20s.
Yeah. I think part of this too, because I've seen marriages where they come together and one spouse has, hundreds of thousands of dollars that they've been saving over the years, and another spouse has nothing, or has a couple $1,000s, and that's not uncommon. That happens a lot. And the thing to recognize about that is that means you've got two very different investment philosophies. You've got one person who's very disciplined, who says, hey, I'm not going to touch this. I'm going to just let this grow. And you've got someone else who probably has participated in 401k plans and things like that. But then, things come up and they're like, yeah, we need to pull this out. And there's a reason one person has accumulated over the years and one hasn't, right? And so I think like that's something that needs to be addressed and looked at. Is there going to be a firewall between that, or are we going to get into marriage and you're going to say, no, hey, we're working together and we need this $30,000 and I see that in your 401k and we need to pull that out, because that does happen. And so having those conversations about investment philosophy or how you feel about investments, and is this really something we can leave and let it grow, or is this something that is accessible if we need to? And I think that's an important thing to understand.
Sometimes there's an investment education gap there too, right? If you have somebody that's saved and invested and they have a couple $100,000, and you have somebody else that hasn't saved and invested, or they continue to draw it out early, things like that. A lot of times that's because they're uncomfortable with the swings of the market. And so all of a sudden, if you get into a big downturn and you have a portfolio that's down 30%, and so your $300,000 goes down to $200,000, it's down $100,000. The spouse without the experience might come at you and say, look, I was right. Look at all this money you lost. We could have done so much with this had we just accessed it, and we could have made so many memories, or we could have had the house paid off, or I could have had all this security.
I knew it was going to crash.
I knew it was going to happen. I told you, right? I told you so. And that's going to create some more marital conflict if we haven't had that discussion early and tried to bring the knowledge and education gap a little closer to each other as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and we are not counselors. However, this is a conversation, and Rex, Brandyn, you probably see, you've become, it's part of your job, right? Counseling when you go into, so I didn't think about having a money conversation before getting married. That's why we're putting the podcast out there, is at least think about having the conversation, because when you do get married and you do invite a financial advisor into your home, into your personal business, then this might be the first time you're hearing some of this stuff, and it shouldn't be.
Yeah, it really shouldn't be. It should be that you guys have had conversations before and things like that. But if it is the first time, that's okay too. It's not the end of the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, but be transparent with that advisor, so the advisor knows where the starting point is knowledge-wise, so they can cut through the jargon, they can cut through, all of kind of the nonsense of the business and really boil it down so that both of you fully understand it at the same level. And then that advisor can help grow that education and that knowledge over the time to bring that all the way up. So
that said, Brandyn, I do want to hear that conversation between two experienced financial advisors who fall in love, but they have different maybe strategies in their financial advising plans. And so they're hashing this out at the dinner table before they get married, Yeah,
we'll have to see if that applies anywhere. We'll let you know.
What? It's never happened? Oh, it happens all the time on Wall Street, I'm sure. Do you have some more numbers?
I do.
All right. This is the segment of the podcast where we dive into just totally random numbers that Brandyn finds, and we get to hear these numbers while enjoying some tasty s'mores, which we have yet to have in the podcast studio. But we should share.
We should make that happen.
What about if I just bring the s'mores flavored Pop-Tarts? I think that would be.
Yeah.
Ooh, that would be good. Or the cold cereal.
Or the are there s'mores cold cereal?
Oh yeah.
All right, Brandyn, what do you got?
So I want you to think back exactly 6 years ago.
No.
What were you doing 6 years ago today?
Oh, hating COVID? Is that where?
Yeah.
That would be March of 2020.
Yep.
Yeah.
We were sitting, and what's interesting about that is what were we told? March, April.
I was trying to buy toilet paper that day.
Yeah, that's true. That was rough.
We were
There's
told
the story
6 feet and all the other things.
Yeah.
We're all going to die,
6
apparently.
feet, masks.
This is the new normal, right?
Yeah.
It's different this time. What's funny to me is how often we are wrong when someone says it's different this time, right? How often it gets back. And I think in investing too, it's important to recognize when someone says, hey, yeah, this is usually bad or this is usually good, but it's different this time. That should be a pretty significant, flag. I know obviously the markets, what did the markets do? Immediately, took quite a nosedive.
Dropped like 40% that first 4 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that.
Yep. In 33 days, the S&P 500 fell 33.9%. Yeah, that was sharp. That was steep. Since that low, though, the S&P has rallied 196%.
Wow.
I mean, significant growth.
If you sold at that bottom and panicked out and didn't get back in, that's a painful lesson.
Yep.
Wow. That's amazing. That's an amazing run.
You could hurt in multiple ways from...
And you think about a 200% return, right?
Yeah.
Because it hasn't been straight. We had, 2022 with rough. 9% inflation. That was a rough year, right? Here we are in the middle of an Iran conflict that's put a little bit of pressure on the markets. We've had, rising interest rates, lowering interest rates. We've had a presidential change. And we've had a lot of motion during that time period.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah. So what's your lesson there, Brandyn? Stick and stay?
A little bit. Yeah, I think so. Be cautious when people tell you this time is different.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, sometimes when you're getting married, you're gonna propose to the love of your life.
Sometimes
your partner.
I hope you're always proposing to the love of your life.
Not always. I mean, sometimes you settle.
But depends on who you are.
Hope not.
Sometimes you settle. Sometimes you just like, well, you'll do. But before you'll do, is that what you say at the? When
you'll do. I think it's I do.
It's I do.
But
okay.
You could.
You'll do. You do need to cover past financial baggage. So, Brandyn, what's some examples of that, and how do you dive into that conversation?
Yeah, I had a friend tell me once that he was dating, and he found a title loan application. And
are you serious? That sounds extraordinarily familiar. Yeah.
No, but I think these are important things to talk about, to go over, and how do you feel about credit cards?
Yeah.
What do we do you use a credit card? For me, right, and this is where some of us differ on opinion. I think credit cards are fantastic tools if you have them set up to pay off every single month, and you never ever let a balance accrue after that, right? And you can get points and rewards, and that can be a really good financial tool. Not only that, it's really nice to track your spending, right? Because you can see all of that aggregated together in one spot. And so I think credit cards can be really important. But how do you feel about credit card debt? How do you feel about car debt? How do you feel about student loans and really understanding mostly loans, because it happens quite often that someone just assumes, hey, it looks like you're doing great, and they don't realize that all the doing great is actually just mounted amounts of debt, whether that's student loans, car debt, credit card debt. And so it's important to kind of know where people are at.
Yeah.
I think it'd be good to compare war stories, right?
That's a good idea.
One of your dates.
Yeah.
And just kind of let's go for a cheap burger and let's share kind of financial war stories. What's the worst financial decision that you've made? What's the worst financial
Rex is
decision?
Like the best today. I just want to go back in time, dude.
I am a bundle of fun.
This is not what Rex did.
This is learning from what Rex did not do.
That's true.
So
we're going on a burger date to tell financial war stories. I love it. All right.
Yeah, I don't know that we're like the most qualified like dating advice. I've always loved giving dating advice, but I probably have the least amount of dating experience.
These are good. Hey, we're saving you though. This is what you should probably give it a shot, right?
Hey, I think my disclaimer is you should go ahead and just kind of maybe not take everything I say word for word, but maybe morph it just into your own language a little bit.
We're really good at money, and we've seen a lot of things happen to people around money, right? Yeah. And so, is our delivery ideal? Probably not. But if you can have it in the back of your mind and work it into your own life somehow, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I think people understand the concept,
right?
Talking about financial baggage, I think another area that people need to talk about is inheritance. Bringing inheritance into a marriage.
Or helping parents, because that happens too, where people are helping their parents out, whether they're living with them or
siblings, or how do we help family? I think those are big discussion points that you need to address as far as, if I inherit money, is that going to become a marital asset? Are we going to combine that? Am I going to keep it separate? And because there's different ramifications on that money and how that's going to be handled. And if you end up going through a divorce, how that is going to be distributed between the two of you.
Also, and this isn't baggage. I mean, the kids aren't baggage, but the financial obligations that include alimony and child support need to be considered as well.
Yeah. Any payments that you're being required to make for any amount of time should be a discussion point before, probably before engagement. You should be having those kinds of discussions, such as, I've got this bad loan I'm paying on, or I've got this car loan, or I'm responsible to pay alimony for 10 years or until they get married, or I have, child support until they're 18, and then I'm also responsible for half their college or whatever it is, right? Whatever those divorce decrees are requiring you to say.
But beyond that, too, how are you helping your kids, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who feel, hey, once the kids are 18 out of the house, they are on their own, right? And obviously, the worst case scenario, but they are a self-sustaining. Then there's a lot of people who are like, no, they're really struggling, they're trying their best, but they've had hard times. And I funnel them money on a consistent basis. And I've watched that really tear apart marriages, right? Where, especially second marriages, where maybe they both have their own set of kids, and maybe the kids are doing differently. Some kids might need help, some kids might not need help. And how are you guys going to handle that? As far as, are you treating all the kids equally? Can you afford to help the kids? All those questions that should be answered as far as what's going on, because that's hard, right? Especially if you've got a spouse, one of the spouses that has been helping kids, another that hasn't. How do you combine that?
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times that's where you find lack of transparency, right? As one of the spouses is funneling, here's 100, here's 500, here's 1,000, right, whatever, to kids, and the other spouse has no idea that's even going on.
Right, yeah.
Right, and you're headed for trouble. But there's a lot of those discussions, right? Whether it's, his kids, her kids, our kids, and you've got all three scenarios, whether it's just his kids and our kids, whether it's, I only have kids pre-marriage and we're not going to have any of our own, so how do we treat my kids? And does that take away from our financial life and trips that we want to take together? And are you going to begrudge it if I help my kids out? I mean, there's so many, variations and deviations of that you've got to have those discussions before you get married. You've got to figure that out.
Well, it would sure help. If you don't have them, it would sure help. So this is your hint.
This is your shot over the bow.
Yeah.
Save your marriage before the marriage.
So Rex, we were teasing you a little bit, and I appreciate you being fun.
Teasable.
Teasable. Yeah. But I do want to know how on date 3 you're going to cover estate planning.
Yeah, so on estate planning on date 3,
We're going to a little bit nicer restaurant.
nope, we're going to tour the mortuaries.
That's a great idea.
And we're going to have a discussion of, the cost of caskets, because caskets can range from like $1,000 to maybe about $20,000, $25,000 if you want gold inlay and all the things, right? And so, we're going to have that discussion of, how do you want to be buried? Do you want to be cremated? Maybe we'll go over to the mausoleum, right, and look at the cremations and see what that looks like, because that's only $250. I mean, that's super inexpensive. And
Rex, you need to double down on just making sure your marriage is healthy and strong and not going anywhere.
Yeah, but I think on estate planning, I think the question becomes, especially on second marriages, of what's going to happen to the house that we live in, right? I have a couple of kids. You have a couple of kids. Are you going to live in the house? And what happens to my kids' inheritance if you're living in the house, right? Do they get it when you sell? Do they get it when you get married? If you marry another person after I'm gone, what's going to happen to that? As far as the inheritance, and what happens to this, big retirement account that we've been living off of and that's been supporting our life. I pass away, I've got my kids as beneficiaries, or I've got you as half a beneficiary, my kids as half, however we're going to do that. And is that going to be enough to sustain your lifestyle and take care of you? Are my kids going to sue you for that money? Are they going to begrudge you? I mean, how's this all going to roll? And I think, again, it comes down to being transparent, not only with your spouse or the person you're dating, but also with your kids, if it's a second marriage, of, look, I worked for this money. This isn't your money. I'm going to,
do what I want.
So even when I'm gone, this isn't your money. I'm going to give it to somebody else if you guys fight over this.
Yeah, but this is a really big one, especially later in life marriages. And specifically what I've seen happen a lot is where you have one spouse that's a lot older that has money and marries a much younger spouse, right? Maybe 10 or 15 years younger.
Somebody that's 80 and marries a 20-year-old.
Maybe not that, but maybe 10 to 15 years younger, right?
Yeah.
That's going to very likely outlive them, and not only outlive them by a lot, right? And in those cases, a lot of times those kids will get to the point where all of a sudden then their parent dies, they've lost both of their parents, and they still have yet to receive an inheritance, and this new spouse that comes along and is much younger is now living in the house and living on the inheritance. And kids can see that from a ways out, right? Even while you're still alive, kids can see, well, that delayed my inheritance by 10 to 20 years, and she's going to spend on things that I don't agree with. And it can really I've watched it put significant strains on not only the relationship with the new spouse, right, but also the kids with their parents, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you marrying this person? Why is this happening? Why, and so I think, I don't know the right answer to it, but I do think open communication and making sure that those things are thought out. I think this is a perfect segue into the estate planning, right? Because there is estate planning you can do to make sure that the new spouse is taken care of throughout their life, but that your kids will still get an inheritance, and that doesn't just all funnel into the new spouse's kids.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of things like that, and there is a lot of times those kids equate money and love as the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. That if I don't receive an inheritance, my dad must not have loved me, or my mom must not have loved me, and so.
And that's 100% true.
Absolutely. Right.
But
they didn't. They really didn't love you.
But there is something, right? Like if someone is walking around handing out cookies and they skip you, you're like, what?
Right. But there's a lot of ways to handle that, right? Whether it's through being transparent communication and estate planning and trusts and things like that. A lot of times people will use life insurance as well. To kind of bridge that gap so that there's some life insurance payout either to the spouse or to the kids so that they receive something at that point. And so, Brandyn and I don't talk a lot about life insurance because we're not, although we believe in life insurance and we believe that it's an important tool in people's lives at different stages, a lot of times we feel like it gets oversold and used in a lot of ways that it shouldn't be used. And so we don't talk a lot about that. But this, there are situations where it makes sense. And this is one of those situations where it can make sense. It's not always the best performing asset. It's not always the most cost-effective way to do it. but it is about the only tool that creates money when money needs to be created, right? and this is one of those situations that may fit that bill.
Yeah. Okay. I think the important takeaway, without going into a deep dive into estate planning, is that you can set up various types of trusts that will, at your death, you can designate and say, hey, when I pass, I want X amount of dollars to go to each kid, and I want to designate some for the spouse. You can designate or create a trust that takes care of a spouse for their lifetime, providing set amounts of benefits, and then when they pass, it's an irrevocable trust, right? So that spouse can't modify it or change it or do anything other than just receive what they are set to receive. And then upon their passing, then the remainder goes to whoever you'd like. And so there are ways to meet with an estate planning attorney and essentially create whatever you want to have happen to make sure that happens. And I think that's an important piece of those later in life marriages, to make sure that that's really planned for. Because otherwise, it's so easy for it all to just go to that younger spouse. 10 years goes by and, she's lost contact with all your original kids. And she's like, well, actually, I'm just going to give this to my kids, right? And that can happen, is very easy and natural to happen.
We have a couple of really good podcasts on estate planning that people should check out. There's a lot of pitfalls when you're doing that. I mean, one that I saw just recently was somebody had left the estate in an irrevocable trust for a spouse, and so the spouse is able to receive up to 5% per year of that estate, and in addition to that, it can cover health, welfare, and maintenance, some basic things, which includes like home expenses or health care if she were to get cancer or something like that and have, need additional treatment or travel for that, things like that. However, the pitfall was he put the kids from the first marriage as the trustees over that trust. And so there's a very competing interest there, because the kids receive the inheritance of whatever they don't spend on the stepmom.
Right.
And so, they want to withhold benefits. And so stepmom wants, it's just, it gets ugly really, really quick. And so you really want to work with a team of advisors that's going to see those pitfalls in advance and walk you through a lot of different scenarios to see what's going to work for you and your family.
All right. Well, as we close things out here, we have a couple left. Day-to-day financial management, Brandyn, is probably something that I'm assuming that it would be easier to talk about early in a relationship. It's like, how do you paying your bills? How you paying? What's going on? Like, what are we doing? Like, especially if you ever talk about like moving in with each other, it's like, well, how are we gonna split the bills? Well, like that kind of just comes up like pretty quick,
Yeah, I think that's more natural.
Yeah.
And yeah. But I think it's good to be conscious about, sometimes I see people that just have kind of fallen into, they move in together and then they're covering this, and it just kind of like, it just morphs without any rhyme or reason. I think if you can be a little bit more conscious about how and why you're splitting bills and covering bills, that can be a good thing.
I think if you're aware and you're paying attention to details, it can spawn a lot of these conversations, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're at the gas pump, all of a sudden they put in a gas rewards phone number, right? And so they're accruing gas points. And so that can easily lead into the, I see you do that. Do you believe in points?
Yeah. Where's my points?
Do you believe in credit card points? My points. Right?
Yeah.
Do we have a gift card? Can I use that to go buy a soda or what? You're right. I mean, and so, but it can lead into that conversation, right? Or, I noticed that you used a credit card instead of a debit card for this purchase. Do you often use credit cards? Do you have a credit card balance? Are you doing that for points? Right. So I think if you're aware, it can kind of spawn into some of those conversations as you're dating. Again, probably.
And if you only gas up at Costco, that tells me something about your financial decisions
and how you value time, because you had to wait for 2 hours in line to get the gas, right? I mean, so
you saved a few dollars. Man. So yeah. And then finally, Rex, did you ask for a prenup?
Well, it was my first marriage, so and I was young, but no prenup on me. No prenup. But I'm in the middle of reviewing the financial pieces of a prenup right now for one of our clients, and it is an in-depth prenup. Those are tricky conversations. Yeah. Those are hard conversations. Yeah. Because no matter how you frame that, it comes across as "I love you, but."
You're right. I love you, but if this doesn't work out, I don't want you stealing all my money.
Right. And so, but I do think that, I think the best way to frame that is still with storytelling. and saying, and making sure you say, look, this is how my first marriage was handled and what happened, and this is what I've seen, or my best friend went through this, and this is what happened, and because of that, I feel really strongly about this, and so I don't want to make this a negative, and I don't want to make it so that it's combative, but I do want to make sure that we're both protected for the future in what we want and what we believe and things like that, so it doesn't become a point of conflict 6 months or a year or 5 years into the marriage.
Yeah.
And so are you open to this idea? Are you not? And I think that's how you broach it first. And if they're not, then I think you have tough decisions to make, right? And so you want to broach are you open to it or not early on in the dating scene of that. If you're going into a second marriage and you have assets that you're wanting to do through a prenup. And then once you get into that, then I think it's easier. Okay, who's going to draft it? Who's going to write it up first? And then we can each look at it. And then once we're done looking at it, we can each take it to our respective counsel and have them look at it and kind of tweak this out so that we're both super comfortable.
I have never had to deal with that. Just listening to you talk, Rex, it does almost feel like it violates your relationship somehow. Like it's like. I don't know. It's weird.
I don't think it has to. I think it's the way that's phrased. And first, just for definition, right? A prenuptial agreement, also known as a prenup, is essentially where you say, hey, before you get married, you go to an attorney and you essentially list out, hey, these are assets that I had on my own. These are assets that she had on her own. And if this marriage were to dissolve, right, I still take my money, she still takes her money, and it's not all combined into one pot and split.
That makes more sense.
Right?
So ideally, you have the conversations about like, oh, your family owns this farm and my family has this. And so you're like, well, if we ever get divorced, like I'm getting half the farm, right? And you're like, well, not really. That's my family. So let's put that on paper. Like, let's make sure
right.
Let's make sure we understand who gets what here, just in case.
And I think that's why it's hard. Yeah. But I think I think the way that might make sense to address that would to be just that. Hey, I don't want tangible assets to get in the way of our relationship, right? Like I don't want me having stuff or you having stuff like to be why we're trying to make this work, why we're trying to be married so that we can gain assets or right.
There's so many delicate discussions that happen in this, right? Because there's so many side discussions that can pop up, such as, okay, well, we're going to protect our own assets. Well, then when we go on vacation, are you spending your assets and it's coming out of yours, or it's coming out of mine? And it's all so intertwined. It's very delicate conversations. And so, am I keeping the Bitcoin account? Or are you keeping the Kraft fortune from ketchup and mustard and all that kind of stuff? Or how's that going to happen? Or like the farm, or I came into this and I started a business and I own this business, and this business is only worth X today, but it may be worth 10X. If we get separated in 10 years, and you may have participated in that, right? You may have sacrificed right along with me, and yet that's part of that. How does that work, right? And so that's why I feel like you need to be very open and transparent on it, but you also need a good team around both of you working through that. Yeah. Right.
And I think you can lean on the team to say, hey, my financial advisor is telling me I need to do this. I don't know how I feel. I know it's hard. It's complex. Can we at least meet with them and let us be kind of a little bit of the bad guys? And I've done that for people, right? Where I've been the one saying, hey, this is really why, from a financial planning standpoint, we ought to have one of these in place. And then you can go back and forth with your advisor, with attorneys, and hopefully delicately make sense of that.
Yeah, for those advisors that like to listen to our podcast, because I know there's a lot of you out there, I think it's really good to do the pros and cons of both, right, on both sides, and let them make their own decision and say, look, here's the pros of doing it this way. Here's some of the negatives that we've seen from doing it this way. And I don't think it's our role to say this is how it needs to be done. I think it's our role to make sure that you understand the different ways that it can be done and the ramifications that can come out of each, and then let them make their own decision, right, as to how that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Great work, you guys. We made it through all these questions that we should just ask someone on our first date. So about finances before we get married.
Happy dating. Happy first date, everybody.
Sadly, Rex is off the market, so you cannot go back and redo that one, Rex.
Sorry, everybody.
Yep. But that was fun. That's good advice. And I wish I had even known the questions to ask back in the day. It's just helpful. So if you found value in this podcast, consider supporting us at buymeacoffee.com/Banyan Media. That's BANYAN. It's Banyan Media. You can watch and subscribe to us on our YouTube at Through the Pines. If you're only listening to this audio edition, jump onto the YouTube at Through the Pines, and you can see our wonderful, beautiful faces there. You can like us on Facebook at Pines Podcast and follow us on Instagram, where we put up shorts to keep you entertained. Reels, I guess is what they call that on the Instagram, at Pines_podcast. Again, thanks for tuning in. This has been Through the Pines, reminding you to use yesterday's dollars to finance tomorrow's dreams.